as they are, it's time that we do something about it. And here we look at something that was great that happened to Apostle Paul. At that time, his name was Saul. Something great had happened to him. And we realize that later on in chapter 21 and verse, well, I should say chapter 22 and also as well as chapter 26, that when Paul is at his most critical time of need, he stands up and he gives his testimony.
All right.
In fact, he makes a request when he was in Jerusalem to the chief of the captains. He said that he need not for anybody to speak for him. He said, if you would just allow me to speak for myself. And then he stood up and began to give this same testimony that was previously read in your hearing. And then in chapter 26, we see in verse 1 that then there was the great King Agrippa that was there. He was one that was very knowledgeable of the Jewish law. And then he persuaded him to let him speak for himself. And then again, he did the same thing. He stood up and he shared the gospel of what Jesus had did for him.
All right.
And being that I said it's a simple message is because I want to encourage you, just as Paul gave his testimony, we also need to stand up and give our testimony as well.
All right.
Now, mind you that your testimony may not be as great and elaborate as the one of Paul or some of the people in this church, but I believe this. I believe that God has given each and every one of us a testimony to share with our brother and our sister. And I want to let you know that you may tell that testimony and it may fall on deaf ears, but I want to tell you that it's not meant for everybody. But your testimony is meant for somebody. See, there are some people that I can tell my testimony to and I can reach somebody.
All right.
And there are some that I cannot reach. But the one that I cannot reach, there's somebody else waiting to give their testimony. And a lot of times we feel that we shouldn't give our testimony because it's not that great. But that's just your opinion about the situation. I want to let you know that even as we see in chapter 22 and verse 15, it reads, "For thou shalt be," this is when Paul was standing up. He said, "For thou shalt be his witness unto all men of what thou hast seen and heard." I believe there's some people that have seen and heard some things about God. That God has moved in their lives. God has done some cures in their lives. And we need not to keep our mouth closed. There was a man that I seen that had got saved. In fact, this man, if you sat down with him now, I considered in my older days to be an alcoholic, but I could sit down with this man with a 6-pack of Budweiser, and he would drink 5 and I would drink 1. But let me tell you this, that even he got saved one day. And I said, man, you need to give your testimony. You say, you don't drink no more? He said, no. He said, God done changed me. I said, man, you don't curse no more? He said, no. God done changed me.
All right.
And he began to cry and weep because of what God has done for him. And I said, you need to give your testimony. And he said these words to me. He said, I'm not ready to give my testimony. And I told him, I said, brother, that testimony don't belong to you. God did that in your life for his purpose, not for yours. He did that so somebody else that was in your situation can be lifted up and brought out of what they're in. So don't hold your peace. Tell somebody about your story. Everybody have a testimony. Let me share with you a little bit of my testimony.
All right.
When I was young, My parents didn't force me to go to church. But there were some neighbors, my uncle, that would go to church every Sunday. And he would pass by, Curtis, you going to church? And I said, no, I got to stay out here and hunt these birds. I got to go fishing. And I didn't want to go to church. But I remember that one time that their church was going to New Orleans, to Lake Pontchartrain. And he cut a deal with me. He said, son, you can come with us if you go to church. So I figured I would make a couple of visits to church. And then go back and go to Lake Pontchartrain, and then I'll come back and do my fishing and hunting like I wanted to do. But I want to let you know that maybe that was enough to just get me through. And then I went on through life, and I didn't go to church very much, but I visited occasionally. But as you've heard this part of the testimony, I cannot remember the day I got saved.
All right.
But what I do remember that it was in St. John First Missionary Baptist Church, where that it was around about the year of 1985, where that someone had called me to go to a revival.
All right.
And I came to the revival not knowing where I was going, and I came here. And the preacher preached a powerful message, and he gave his testimony that night. And there was something about me sitting on the back pew. I could not keep my peace. I had to get up and come to the altar. And that night I gave my life to the Lord.
Yes, sir.
And then I went back home and I tried to come to church the next Sunday. And I believe I did. But then I got up the next weekend and my friends told me, they said, man, you missed a good party last weekend. And I couldn't stand it. So I went back into the world. And then years later I came back.
All right.
I rededicated my life.
Oh, man.
I had to deal with some issues.
All right.
Issues about when I come back to the church. Do I need to get saved again?
All right.
Or do I just need to give all that I have to God and let Him continue to do what He's been doing all these years?
All right.
Yes, yeah. And the preacher told me, he said, man, you need to get saved again. But I didn't know no better. So I went up and I got saved again, as he said. But I found out later that I didn't have to do that. Because in St. John, somewhere around the year of 1985, I genuinely accepted Christ as my Savior.
All right.
And He covered me all those years. And then I went to a church and I rededicated my life. And then I went on to another church. And then I got remarried. And there's my wife now. And the Lord was urging me to come to her home church and visit. And I came here at St. John and I visited. I didn't know this was the church I got saved in. I didn't know it until after I became a member. I looked around and said, this place look familiar. Now you know how messed up I really was back in the 80s. And I realized that this was the place that I got saved. And here I am before I realized that I'm in the pulpit as a preacher. Ain't it amazing what God can do? I had this thought as I was preparing this message. I thought about some of the saints, like Deacon Henry, Deacon Farrell, and Sister Crawford over there, Sister Ida Davis, and all those that was there back in the 80s. I realized something. They did something then that a lot of us is doing now. We don't even realize it. These people was financing my salvation. And I didn't even know it. And I thought about it and I began to cry. Because if it had not been for people like them,
All right.
keeping the lights on St. John, keeping the bills paid at St. John, paying the preacher to come to preach the revival, I don't know where I would be.
That's right.
So I just want to say that if you were here somewhere around about the mid part of 1985, I want to say thank you. Thank you for financing my salvation. Boy, that's all right. Let me tell you a little something about this story about Paul. And just briefly, and I want to move fast. But we read in verse 3 that he said, and suddenly there shone around about him